The hum of the generator echoed faintly across the compound, a low reminder that the world outside had failed. Inside the perimeter of rusted steel walls topped with floodlights and barbed wire, the last known safe zone still stood, barely. For the Miller family, this was the only home they had left. Rebecca Miller adjusted the straps on her teenage son Jacob's worn backpack as he prepared for another food distribution line. Her husband, Mark, stood nearby, gripping his radio like a lifeline. They hadn't heard any outside signals in over a month. No broadcasts. No calls. Just silence. And silence, in a world crawling with the dead, was more terrifying than noise. "This place won't hold forever," Mark muttered, eyes scanning the defensive towers. "I know," Rebecca replied quietly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "But where would we even go?" That was the question no one had an answer for. The zone had been established by remnants of the National Guard over a year ago. Back then, it had been a beacon, clean water, medical tents, and armed patrols. Now, supplies were running thin, leadership was fractured, and tensions were rising. Today was a food distribution day, and already, people were gathering in long lines that stretched through the zone's market area. Jacob stepped up beside his parents, his voice low. "Dad, there's a rumor going around that the east gate's been breached." Mark's face hardened. "Who told you that?" "Sean. He says his uncle saw them drag a guard's body out this morning." Rebecca's stomach turned. They would have sounded the alarm. Jacob shrugged. "Unless they don't want to cause panic." That idea stuck with Mark long after they made their way to the center square. The family joined the queue as guards with makeshift armor watched the crowd, their eyes twitching with fatigue. The sense of order that had once made the zone a refuge now felt forced, artificial, like a fence holding back a storm that had already arrived. Behind them, a scuffle broke out near a ration cart. A young man shoved his way forward, shouting about missing food credits. A guard raised his rifle, not to fire, but to intimidate. The boy froze, hands raised, but the crowd shifted nervously. It was getting harder to tell who the real threat was, the people outside the walls, or the ones slowly unraveling inside them. Jacob leaned toward his mother. "We should get out of here." "Shoo," Rebecca whispered. "Wait until we've got the food." As they finally approached the front of the line, a loud crack boomed from the east side of the compound. People froze. Rebecca's heart skipped. It didn't sound like a shot, it sounded like something had fallen, something big. A wall? Then the sirens blared. Guards shouted orders. People screamed. Jacob clutched his mother's arm. "We have to move." Mark's radio crackled with frantic voices. "Breach. East gate down. Repeat, east gate." Chaos erupted. The Millers ducked behind a supply tent as panic surged through the crowd. In the distance, a guard tower fell, flames bursting from its base. The screams were no longer human. Groans, wet and guttural, rose from the breach as the dead flooded into what was once sanctuary. "We need to get to the south tunnel," Mark shouted. Rebecca nodded, grabbing Jacob's hand as they weaved through terrified civilians and confused soldiers. The zone was falling apart around them, one spark had lit the fuse, and now the whole place was about to explode. They reached the south fence where a narrow tunnel had once been used for supply runs. A few guards were herding people through it, trying to keep order, but too many were pushing forward in blind desperation. A woman tripped and was crushed underfoot. Rebecca tried not to look. Mark waved his ID badge. "Civilian clearance." "Let us through." A young guard nodded. "Hurry, sir. We can't hold them off for long." Inside the tunnel, the air was thick with fear. They could still hear the groans of the undead behind them, getting louder. Jacob clutched his mother's hand tightly. "What if they get through the other side?" "We keep running," she answered, her voice steely. At the far end of the tunnel, the world opened up to the unknown. Past the final gate lay the ruins of what was once a city, now overgrown and buried under silence. They stepped into it with nothing but a backpack, a radio, and a desperate will to survive. The last safe zone had fallen. And the real fight was just beginning. The gate behind them slammed shut, metal clanging like a final death knell. The sound echoed across the empty streets of what used to be downtown. Buildings stood like skeletons, windows shattered, walls blackened from old fires, and silence pressing against the skin like cold fog. Mark took the lead, rifle slung over his shoulder, scanning every alley and rooftop. His military training hadn't prepared him for this kind of war. Rebecca kept Jacob close, her hand never letting go of his. For the first time in months, they were outside the protection of the zone. No more patrols. No more fences. Just them and the undead. We head west, Mark said, pointing to a collapsed freeway in the distance. The old evacuation routes might still have supply stashes. Jacob looked up at him. And if there's nothing? Then we keep moving, Rebecca answered before Mark could speak. The streets were a graveyard of abandoned cars and crumbling dreams. They moved fast but quiet, weaving between broken buses and looted shops. Here and there, faded posters flapped in the wind, government flyers from the first days of the outbreak. Stay calm. Stay inside. Help is coming. Help never came. At a boarded-up pharmacy, they paused. Mark motioned for silence, pressed his ear to the wood, then pushed the door open slowly. The hinges creaked, but nothing moved inside. He slipped in first. Rebecca and Jacob followed. Inside, dust coated everything. Shelves were mostly bare, but they found a few essentials, bandages, expired painkillers, and 2 bottles of water. Rebecca opened a drawer behind the counter and found a crumpled photo of a family, smiling in front of the same store years earlier. They probably thought this place would keep them safe too, she whispered. Mark's radio crackled. Just static, again. No voices. No hope of reaching anyone still inside the fallen zone. He turned it off with a sigh. We keep moving. They exited through a side door, but as they stepped into the alley, Jacob froze. Wait, what was that? A low groan echoed off the brick walls. Mark raised his weapon. From the far end of the alley, a shadow moved, slow and dragging. Then another. And another. The dead had found them. Back! Mark ordered. They sprinted, the family weaving through rusted dumpsters and collapsed scaffolding. The groans multiplied, some deeper, some wet and rattling. Rebecca glanced back once and saw at least 6 figures stumbling after them, their jaws slack and eyes empty. They burst into an open intersection where a broken streetlight leaned against a city bus. Mark yanked open the bus's back emergency door and shoved Jacob inside first. Rebecca climbed in behind him. The groans grew louder as Mark scrambled in last and slammed the door shut. The bus rocked as the undead reached it, slamming their fists against the sides. Jacob pressed his back against the seat, his eyes wide. They're not stopping. They never do, Mark muttered. Rebecca scanned the front of the bus. There's an emergency hatch on the roof. Mark nodded. Help me boost him up. They lifted Jacob first. His fingers found the handle, pulled the hatch open, and hoisted himself up. Rebecca followed, then Mark, just as the front windshield cracked under the pressure of decaying fists. They emerged into the open air on top of the bus. From here, they could see the street stretching in every direction, and more walkers shuffling out of buildings, drawn by the noise. We need height, Mark said. That fire escape, go! A nearby building had a rusted ladder hanging just low enough. Jacob jumped, caught it, and pulled himself up. Rebecca followed with a grunt, and Mark brought up the rear, kicking the ladder down once he reached the first platform. They climbed 5 floors to the rooftop, where they collapsed behind a broken air vent. Safe, for the moment. Jacob's breath came in sharp gasps. How many were there? Too many, Mark said. They're gathering. That means this area was quiet until now. We woke them up, Rebecca added, her voice low. Mark peered over the ledge. The street below was swarming. The bus was surrounded. There was no going back now. They huddled together on the rooftop as the sun began to set, casting a red glow across the dead city. "Do you think there are others out here?" Jacob asked. Mark didn't answer right away. He watched the horizon, where distant smoke curled into the darkening sky. "I don't know," he said finally. "But we need to find out. Because if there's not, then it's just us now." Rebecca pulled Jacob close. "Then we keep each other alive. No matter what." As night fell over the ruins, the Miller family lay low, the sounds of the undead drifting up like a funeral song. The zone was gone. And survival had only just begun. The rooftop was quiet. Too quiet. Only the distant groans of the undead stirred the night air as the Millers huddled behind a rusted air duct, wrapped in silence and shadows. The city stretched out in every direction, lifeless and dark. No lights. No voices. No hope. Jacob couldn't sleep. He lay between his parents, his eyes fixed on the stars above. It felt wrong, like looking up at a normal sky while the world rotted beneath it. "Do you think there are others still alive?" he whispered. Rebecca ran a hand through his hair. "Yes," she said firmly. "We're not alone out here." Mark stirred. "We can't rely on hope alone. Tomorrow, we look for higher ground. Radio towers. Anything that might pick up a signal." Jacob nodded, though fear gnawed at his stomach. Every move felt like a gamble now. Every shadow could hide death. But they had no choice. At sunrise, the family scouted the rooftop. From the eastern edge, Mark spotted a taller building 2 blocks over, an old telecommunications center, half its glass windows blown out, its steel antenna still towering above the city. "That tower's our best shot," he said. "If there's a signal to catch, it'll be from there." "Let's move before the streets fill again," Rebecca added. They descended carefully, using the same fire escape that had saved them the night before. The streets below were scattered with the dead, some still moving, others long still. The groaning had subsided, but the memory lingered. Mark took point, leading them down back alleys and side streets. Every step was taken in silence. They moved like ghosts. As they passed an old diner, Jacob paused at the broken window. Inside, the counters were still set with plates, some half-eaten, others dusty with time. It looked like the world had stopped mid-bite. Suddenly, a clatter from inside. Jacob froze. Mark raised his weapon. A shape moved in the shadows, small, fast. Not a walker. A dog. Thin, trembling, and covered in grime, the dog stepped into view. It looked at them with wide, cautious eyes, then whimpered softly. "Easy," Rebecca whispered, kneeling. She reached into her pack and pulled out a protein bar, unwrapped it, and held it out. The dog crept forward, sniffed, then snatched the food and retreated behind a booth. "He's not infected," Jacob said, hopeful. "Can we keep him?" "We don't have enough food for ourselves," Mark said. "But, if he follows, he follows." The dog did follow, at a distance, ears perked, eyes watchful. The Millers pushed on, finally arriving at the base of the telecommunications building. Its doors were smashed, but the lobby was clear. Graffiti lined the walls. No signal. No help. Only death. "Cheerful," Mark muttered. They climbed 14 flights of stairs, breath ragged by the time they reached the rooftop. The antenna loomed above them like a spear piercing the sky. Mark set the radio down and plugged it into the emergency receiver strapped to his gear. Rebecca scanned the horizon with binoculars. Still nothing. No smoke. No movement. Mark adjusted the dial. Static buzzed through the air. Then, a voice. "Repeat, if you are receiving this signal, respond on open channel 4. This is forward station Echo. We are alive. Supplies limited. Location to follow." Jacob's eyes lit up. "Someone's out there." Mark's hand trembled as he tried to respond. "This is Mark Miller." 3 survivors. We hear you. Repeat, we hear you. Nothing. Just static. Then again, station echo, southwest sector, coordinates, 93 point, the message cut off. Rebecca stared at the radio. We have a direction. Mark quickly jotted down the last partial coordinates. Southwest. That's deep into the city. It's better than nowhere, Jacob said. Suddenly, barking erupted from behind them. The dog. They turned and saw it standing at the stairwell, teeth bared, growling at something below. Then they heard it too, shuffling, groaning. Multiple sets of feet dragging up the stairs. They followed our scent, Mark hissed. We've gotta go, now. They sprinted across the rooftop to another fire escape on the west side. Below, a narrow alley stretched like a chute through the city. The dog jumped first, landing with a yelp but quickly bounding forward. Rebecca followed, then Jacob. Mark came last, firing a few shots down the stairwell to slow the advancing walkers. As they reached the street, Jacob looked back. Dozens of the undead had made it to the roof. They didn't stop. They didn't rest. They just kept coming. The Millers vanished into the western ruins, racing toward the slimmest hope they'd found since the fall. Forward station echo might be real. And if it was, it could be the last chance they had. The city's southwest sector loomed ahead, a tangle of half-collapsed buildings and smoke-stained ruins. Mark led the way through broken streets, the dog, whom Jacob had started calling Lucky, trotting quietly alongside them. Behind them, the tower where they'd picked up the signal was now far from view. But the words from the radio still echoed in their minds. Forward station echo, alive, coordinates. The message had cut off too soon. The coordinates were incomplete. But direction, southwest, was enough. It had to be. Stay low, Mark whispered, crouching behind an overturned delivery truck. They were on the edge of what survivors used to call the dead zone, a part of the city hit hardest during the early outbreak, where containment failed almost instantly. According to old maps, it spanned at least 20 city blocks. No one patrolled it. No one dared live in it. But now, they had to move through it. Looks clear, Mark said, scanning the street. We move fast, no noise, and we stay off the main roads. Jacob's hands were shaking. Why do I feel like they're watching us? They probably are, Rebecca muttered. But we're not giving them a reason to chase us. They crept through alleys and broken storefronts. The deeper they went, the worse the damage. Cars were stacked like someone had tried to build a barricade but gave up. Windows were shattered. Doors hung from hinges. And yet, there was a stillness, unnerving and unnatural. They passed a small playground. The swings creaked in the wind. A doll lay face down in the dirt. Jacob stared a moment too long. Don't, Rebecca said gently. Don't think about who lived here. Mark held up a fist, signaling them to stop. He crouched near the base of an apartment building, eyeing the street ahead. Dozens of walkers drifted in the distance, weaving between abandoned vehicles. Not hunting, just waiting. As if time meant nothing to them. We'll never make it past them, he whispered. Back route? Rebecca asked. I think so. Through the building. If the stairs haven't collapsed. They entered through a shattered lobby. Inside, the smell hit them, damp rot, mold, and something worse. Time had turned the place into a tomb. Lucky growled low in his throat. Quiet, boy, Jacob whispered, holding the dog close. The stairwell was intact but narrow and dark. They climbed 3 floors in near silence. On the 3rd floor, Mark pushed open a hallway door and found a row of empty apartments, doors ajar like open mouths. Most were stripped bare. Some still held furniture, covered in dust and cobwebs. They passed a door with scratch marks near the handle. Deep ones. Keep going, Mark urged. No stopping. Halfway down the hall, a loud bang echoed from a door slamming behind them. They froze. Footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Uneven. A walker. Then another. And another. Mark turned. We've been followed. How? Rebecca hissed. Doesn't matter. We're going out the window. Now. He smashed the window at the far end of the hallway with the butt of his rifle. Shards rained down as he helped Jacob and Rebecca climb out onto the fire escape. Lucky jumped easily, landing beside them. Mark was last out, just as the first walker turned the corner. It snarled, a woman, once, now missing half her face, her eyes milky and locked on her prey. The fire escape groaned under their weight, but they climbed down quickly, landing in an alley behind the building. More groans rose nearby. We're drawing them out, Mark said, panting. We need to move fast. The family darted across the alley and into an abandoned bus station. Inside, they found shattered benches and a vending machine that had already been cracked open. But it was quiet, for now. They barricaded the doors with old chairs and metal poles, then collapsed behind the counters, breathing hard. Jacob wiped sweat from his brow. How much farther? Mark looked down at the coordinates he'd scribbled in a notebook. If I'm right, 4 or 5 more blocks. Maybe less. Rebecca leaned against the wall, her hands trembling. This city's a maze. What if the station's gone? We'll know soon enough, Mark replied. Just then, Lucky growled again, low and warning. They all looked up. The front window showed movement. Not walkers. People. 3 figures, dressed in makeshift armor, rifles in hand, scanning the bus station. Jacob gasped. Are they survivors? Mark didn't speak. He watched carefully, hand on his weapon. Maybe. Or looters. One of the strangers pointed at the door. Another spoke into a walkie-talkie. Then, one of them held up a hand and shouted through the glass. Hey! You friendly? Mark stood slowly and raised his hands. We are. Family of 3. Not infected. The stranger nodded. We're from Echo. Silence fell like a bomb. Rebecca blinked. Echo is real? The man nodded again. If you want in, you better come now. This area's about to be overrun. Without a word, the Millers grabbed their packs and followed the strangers out into the dying light of the city. They had a chance now. But Echo would come with its own dangers, and its own secrets. Forward Station Echo wasn't what the Millers expected. From the outside, it looked like a crumbling water treatment plant, surrounded by concrete walls patched together with scrap metal and rusted fencing. The towers weren't tall, the guards weren't many, and the defenses didn't look like much. But it was alive. Lights flickered from inside. Smoke curled from chimneys. Voices carried on the wind. Jacob tightened his grip on Lucky's leash as the trio of armored survivors led them to the entrance. Keep your hands visible, the lead guard said. Echo doesn't take chances. Mark nodded. We're not looking for trouble. Just safety. The gates groaned open, revealing a cluster of tents, prefab shelters, and shipping containers turned into homes. Children played near a bonfire. Men and women in mismatched clothing hauled water in stacked crates. They all looked up as the new arrivals stepped inside, some with hope, others with suspicion. A woman in a long brown coat approached. Her posture was stiff, but her eyes were sharp. New arrivals? Yes, ma'am, said the lead guard. 3, 2 adults, 1 child. They picked up our signal. She studied the family. Weapons? Secured, Mark said calmly. We're just here to survive. She motioned to a tent near the center. You'll be quarantined for 24 hours. After that, we'll talk about your place here. Name's Captain Reese. I run this outpost. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Just like that? No one just gets in. You'll be watched. You'll be tested. Echo's standing because we don't let our guard down. They were led to the quarantine tent, Nothing more than an enclosed structure with cots, a jug of water, and a battery-powered lamp. The air inside was stale but quiet. As the flap closed behind them, Jacob collapsed onto a cot. "It's real, it's actually real." Mark sat near the lamp and leaned forward. "Let's not celebrate too early. People build walls for a reason." Rebecca lay back, exhaustion setting in. "Still, it's the first place that didn't smell like death." Outside, Echo buzzed with life. The Millers watched through a small mesh window as guards rotated patrols and engineers worked on solar panels. A group of women stirred something over a makeshift stove. It almost felt normal. The next morning, a medic arrived. Young, freckled, and friendly, she wore gloves and carried a small kit. "Just need to check vitals, draw blood, the usual. Echo doesn't accept the infected." "We're clean," Mark said. The medic smiled. "Everyone says that. But so far, no bites. That's a good start." After the tests, Captain Reese returned. "You'll get temporary clearance. No weapons yet. And stay inside the zone unless escorted." "Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Mark replied. She studied him a moment. "Military?" "Former," he said. "Army Ranger." Her gaze flicked to Rebecca. "You?" "Nurse." "ER." "Useful," Reese said with a nod. "We need both." They were assigned a small tent near the western wall. Not much, but safer than anything they'd had since the zone collapsed. Jacob hung a small cloth from the top beam, his version of a curtain. By nightfall, they were invited to the communal fire pit. The warmth felt strange. So did sitting near strangers without fear of immediate death. A man named Silas passed them bowls of stew. "Rabbit and dried beans," he said. "Don't ask how we got it." Rebecca smiled. "Thank you." A teenage girl across the fire looked at Jacob. "Is that your dog?" Jacob nodded. "His name's Lucky. He found us." The girl smiled. "You're lucky to have him. Most of us lost pets long ago." Mark watched the people around him, tough faces, guarded eyes. This place wasn't a paradise. It was survival stitched together by willpower and scraps. Later that night, as the camp quieted, Reese called Mark aside. "I need to be honest with you," she said, standing on the upper platform of a watchtower. "Echo's hanging by a thread." "I figured," Mark replied. "We have food for maybe 2 more weeks. Medicine's even worse. We keep sending teams to scavenge, but the city's picked clean. And last week, we lost 4 people. 1 came back infected." Mark clenched his jaw. "So why let us in?" Reese met his eyes. "Because you're useful. Because your family still has hope in their eyes. And because, frankly, we need every set of hands we can get." He nodded. "Then put us to work." She smiled faintly. "Tomorrow, you'll join a recon team. There's an old government cache we've been trying to reach. Supplies, maybe a backup transmitter. We don't have the people. But now, we might." As Mark returned to the tent, he found Rebecca already asleep and Jacob talking to Lucky in hushed tones. He looked around the tent, the camp beyond, the silence above. Echo was real. But survival here would be even harder than the streets. And if they failed, this last safe zone would fall like all the others. The sun had barely risen when Mark tightened the straps on his scavenged vest and slung a borrowed rifle across his shoulder. The air in forward station Echo was still, but tense. Everyone moved with urgency, no wasted steps. The illusion of safety had worn thin. Today, they were risking everything. Captain Reese stood by the northern gate with a folded map in hand. 3 others joined Mark for the mission: Silas, a wiry man with sharp eyes and quiet anger; Dana, a former firefighter with a scar down her neck; and a teenager named Liam who couldn't be older than 17 but carried himself like a veteran. Mark gave Rebecca a last look as he adjusted his gear. "Keep Jacob close. And keep Lucky leashed." I'll be back before sunset. Rebecca nodded. Her lips were tight, her hand gripping Jacob's shoulder. Just come back. The gate opened, revealing a path that twisted through skeletal ruins. They moved fast and low. No vehicles, too loud. Silence was their only weapon. Where exactly are we headed? Mark asked as they crouched behind a crushed billboard. Silas unfolded the map. Old government outpost, one of the last FEMA stockpiles. 2 clicks west, deep in overrun territory. Reese thinks it might have untouched supplies. Dana snorted. If it hasn't been looted, it's probably crawling. Still worth the risk, Silas said. They reached the edge of a shopping district. Burned cars clogged the road. A bus sat in the middle of the intersection, windows shattered, blood smeared across the doors. Liam whispered, "This is where we lost the last team." No bodies were recovered. They slowed their pace. Mark scanned the rooftops. A few crows. No movement. Clear for now. Let's move. The outpost wasn't far now. An old courthouse repurposed in the early days of the outbreak, reinforced doors, steel mesh over windows, a signal tower long since offline. Its imposing frame rose above the shattered skyline like a forgotten promise. As they neared the entrance, Dana checked the perimeter. Doors are intact. No signs of forced entry. Could be sealed since day one. Or bait, Liam muttered. Mark approached first, rifle raised. He knocked once. The sound echoed through the building, but there was no response. No groans. No answering footsteps. Let's breach. They entered in a diamond formation, silent, focused. Inside, dust hung thick in the air. Empty desks, overturned chairs, dried bloodstains. But no walkers. They cleared room by room. The building had been deserted for a long time, but not destroyed. When they reached the main storage room, they froze. Crates. Dozens of them. Labeled, water purification tablets. Medical kits. Emergency rations. Solar batteries. Silas whistled. Jackpot. They began filling their packs. Mark checked dates, most of the supplies were expired, but some remained usable. He opened a crate of sealed MREs and tossed a few to Liam. Take as many as you can carry. Suddenly, Dana raised a hand. Hear that? They all went still. Thump. Then another. From below. Basement, Silas said grimly. We didn't clear it. Before they could retreat, the basement door burst open. A walker stumbled out, then another. Then 5. 10. They had been trapped below. Forgotten. Now released. Fall back. Mark shouted. They opened fire, conserving ammo, aiming for the head. But the hallway was narrow, the exit behind them too far. Liam tripped. A walker lunged. Mark fired, bang, catching it midair. Dana dragged Liam up. Move. They sprinted toward the main door. Mark covered the rear, walking backward, firing short bursts. Blood splattered the walls. Groans rose louder. Silas yanked the door open and found another group waiting outside. Not walkers. Humans. Raiders. 6 of them, armed and masked, rifles raised. Drop your bags, one growled. We'll take it from here. Silas froze. You followed us? Easy pickings, the leader sneered. Let Echo starve. Mark emerged behind the group. The raiders hadn't seen him. He raised his weapon slowly, his hands shaking, but his eyes locked on their leader. One of the raiders saw him. Behind. Too late. Mark fired. Chaos exploded. The team dove for cover as bullets flew. Liam screamed. Dana tackled one raider with a fire axe, taking him down hard. Mark and Silas pinned the rest with covering fire, grabbing the packs mid-fight and retreating. They didn't stop running until the courthouse was 2 blocks behind. Liam limped badly, his leg grazed. "I thought we were dead." "You still might be," Silas said, half laughing, breathless. But they had the supplies. They moved quickly and quietly back toward Echo. No talking. Just the sound of boots on broken pavement. When the gates of Echo came into view again, silhouetted by a red sunset, Mark let out a shaky breath. They had made it. But as Captain Reese met them at the gate, her expression darkened. "What happened?" she asked. Mark looked her straight in the eye. The outpost had supplies, but it also had competition. She understood immediately. Echo wasn't just surviving against the dead anymore. The living were just as dangerous. Echo felt different when they returned. The moment Mark, Silas, Dana, and Liam passed through the gates, heads turned, conversations hushed, and whispers spread like wildfire. They were supposed to be heroes bringing back hope. But instead, they brought something else, tension. Captain Reese stood just inside the courtyard, arms folded, jaw tight. "You weren't followed?" she asked. "No," Mark replied. "We doubled back twice. Lost them." "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be." But that group wasn't random. They knew what was in that cache. Someone tipped them off. Reese's eyes narrowed. "That's not possible." "It is," Silas growled. "There's a leak, Reese." Someone inside Echo told them. That ambush was too well timed. A silence settled between them. Mark stepped forward. "You need to start thinking about internal security. You let anyone walk in here without vetting them. We've been lucky. But luck doesn't last forever." Reese finally nodded. "We'll talk. For now, rest up. I want a full debrief in an hour." As the team dispersed, Mark walked toward his family's tent, exhaustion pressing against his spine. He just wanted to hold Rebecca, check on Jacob, feel something solid under his feet. But as he approached, he saw the flap of their tent already open. Inside, Rebecca sat on the cot, her hands gripping a note. "Mark," she whispered, holding it out. "This was slipped under the tent while you were gone." He took the crumpled paper. "Don't trust the guards. Echo isn't what it seems. A friend." Mark stared at the words, then folded the note carefully. Jacob looked up. "What does it mean?" "It means Echo has more problems than just food," Mark said quietly. Later that evening, the communal fire pit was unusually quiet. Rumors spread fast, a traitor among them. Spies. Raiders who knew their layout. It didn't take long before eyes started watching each other with suspicion instead of trust. "People are scared," Rebecca said. "And scared people turn dangerous." Mark nodded. "We need to find out who wrote this." The following day, Reese summoned Mark to her command post, a former operations trailer now stacked with maps and radios. She stood over a table with several files laid out. "Someone's been siphoning supplies," she said. 2 days ago, our west side storeroom was broken into. Rations, antibiotics, gone. No forced entry. No sign of struggle. Someone used a key." Mark narrowed his eyes. "You think it's connected to the ambush?" "I do now." She pointed at the list of names. "All of these people have key access. You're one of them now." Mark scanned the list. Dana. Silas. Reese herself. Several guards. A few civilian volunteers. And one name he didn't recognize. Kellen? New recruit. Came in 3 weeks ago. He used to work supply runs. Quiet. Keeps to himself. I haven't had a reason to doubt him. Until now. Reese sighed. "I want you to talk to him. Quietly. Off record. I trust your judgment." That night, Mark found Kellen near the fence, sorting salvage from a broken truck. "Mind some help?" Mark asked, keeping his tone friendly. Kellen nodded. "Sure. Long day? Mark picked up a rusted lantern. Always is lately. They worked in silence for a while. Mark watched him from the corner of his eye. His movements were smooth, practiced. No wasted energy. You were out there when the collapse hit? Mark asked casually. Yeah, Kellen said. Lost my wife on day 2. Haven't looked back since. I'm sorry. Kellen shrugged. No use in it. Just survive. Mark placed the lantern down. You ever run into the raiders outside? The question froze Kellen mid-reach. His eyes flicked toward Mark, just for a second. Why? Because they ambushed my team. Knew we were coming. Knew where to hit. Kellen straightened slowly. And you think I told them? I think someone did. Kellen's eyes narrowed. You come out here alone to accuse me? No, Mark said. I came to give you a chance to explain. Silence. Then, Kellen sighed. I didn't tell them. But I know who did. Mark's eyes sharpened. Who? Kellen hesitated. There's a woman, Tess. She handles the outer perimeter shifts. She used to be with them, raiders. Said she left. Reese gave her a second chance. She never said anything about her past. She wouldn't. But she's been meeting someone outside the walls. Kellen pulled a folded map from his vest. I followed her 2 nights ago. Marked the spot. I think she's feeding them intel, maybe trading. Rations for protection. Mark took the map and stood. Thank you. Don't tell anyone else. As Mark returned to Reese with the new information, the shadows around Echo grew longer. Outside the fence, the undead waited. Inside, betrayal was already taking root. If the last safe zone was going to survive, they'd need more than food and walls. They'd need trust, and someone willing to root out the poison inside. Night fell hard over Forward Station Echo. The stars were hidden behind layers of ash and smoke. The wind carried the foul scent of rot from the western ridge. Inside the walls, an unease festered like a wound. Captain Reese stood beside Mark on the central tower, her hand wrapped around a pair of binoculars. You're sure about Tess? Mark nodded. Kellen tracked her. She's been slipping through a breach on the western fence. Meeting someone. Could be scouts. Could be feeding the raiders info. She said she left that life behind, Reese muttered, bitter. I gave her a second chance. Then she used it to put everyone here in danger. Reese lowered the binoculars. She's on watch tonight. West Sector. Mark's voice was cold. Then we confront her. Now. Reese motioned to 2 guards. They moved fast, silent, trained. Echo didn't have many soldiers, but the ones it had were loyal. Armed with restraint but ready to shoot. By the time they reached the western sector, Tess was already gone. Gates open, 1 guard whispered. She's out. Mark scanned the treeline. Wait. A faint flicker, then 2. Flashlight signals. She's signaling someone, Reese said. Mark raised his rifle. We wait until she comes back. We get her alive. 10 tense minutes passed. Then Tess returned, slipping through the breach, unaware she was walking into a trap. Don't move! Reese shouted, stepping from the shadows. Tess froze. What the? Mark leveled his weapon. Who are you signaling? No one, she snapped. We saw you. We know. Tess looked around at the rifles pointed her way, then dropped the small transmitter she held. Look, she said, hands raised, you don't understand. The raiders, they were going to overrun us weeks ago. I made a deal. Feed them just enough, locations, maps, minor supplies, and they'd leave us alone. You betrayed Echo, Reese said, her voice low. You put everyone at risk. I saved Echo. Tess shouted. If I hadn't made that deal, we'd all be dead already. A distant boom echoed across the valley. Then a second. Mark's heart dropped. Was that? A horn blared from the north. Silas's voice crackled through Reese's radio, multiple targets approaching, north wall, armed and fast. They're coming, Mark growled. She stalled us. Tess smirked through clenched teeth. You brought this on yourselves. Reese didn't hesitate. Lock her up. Full alert. Everyone to positions. Echo's under attack. The alarm blared through the camp, and Echo came alive. Civilians rushed to the shelters. Guards armed up. Jacob clutched Lucky as Rebecca pulled him into the triage tent, her hands shaking. Mark sprinted to the north barricade. Status? Silas ducked behind cover. 3 trucks. 24 raiders. They've got Molotovs and, wait, walkers. They're herding walkers. Sure enough, behind the lead truck, a shambling wall of undead advanced, pushed forward by noise and light. The raiders were using them like weapons. Hold fire until they're close. Mark shouted. Make every shot count. The clash erupted like a thunderstorm. Gunfire roared. Screams tore through the night. Raiders leapt from trucks, rifles blazing, ducking behind debris. The walkers surged forward, drawn by the chaos. Inside Echo, Captain Reese directed the fallback line. No retreat to the command trailer. If they take that, we're blind. Rebecca treated the wounded with trembling fingers, trying to keep calm for Jacob, who sobbed beneath the supply table. Lucky barked non-stop, sensing the fear. Mark fought at the barricade until his rifle clicked dry. He pulled his knife, slashing a raider who climbed the wall. Blood splashed across his vest. The world was chaos. Then, boom! One of the Molotovs hit the Western fuel stash. Fire ripped through a corner of Echo, sending smoke and heat into the night sky. Mark turned to Reese's tower. We're losing ground. Reese slammed a fresh mag into her pistol. Then we push back. Suddenly, howls. But not walkers. Dogs. From the eastern ridge, a new group appeared, survivors, mounted on dirt bikes, armed and armored. The signal they'd sent from the courthouse, someone had received it. The newcomers flanked the raiders, guns blazing, catching them off guard. What the hell? Silas shouted. Help, Mark breathed. Reinforcements. The battle tipped. Together, Echo's defenders and the new allies pressed forward, forcing the raiders back. The walkers, confused, turned on anything nearby, including the retreating raiders. Panic spread. Chaos devoured the invaders. By dawn, it was over. Bodies littered the field. Smoke rose from the wreckage. But Echo still stood. Reese limped through the ruins, her coat charred at the edges. She looked at Mark. We survived. Barely, he said. But we're not alone anymore. The newcomers introduced themselves, survivors from another outpost that had heard their signal days ago. They had supplies. Strength. Numbers. Rebuilding began that same day. Tess was sentenced to permanent exile. Rebecca took over the field clinic. Mark began training new defenders. Jacob and Lucky ran the inner camp, handing out food and hope. Echo, battered but alive, became more than a shelter. It became the start of something new. A new safe zone. One no one would tear down again. The end. Let me know if you'd like the full audiobook script compiled, help with YouTube descriptions, or cinematic image prompts for each part.